What's going on, Junkie Nation? Gorgeous George and Goes always deliver the big names. Today we get to talk to one of the best in the business. He is Jason Parillo, MMA head coach based out of SoCal, OC to be more exact, which of course is the same roots as Goes and I were originally from Santa Ana, now living in Vegas. But man, we miss the OC. And the latest accomplishment for this championship winning coach is he was in the corner of Mackenzie Dern at UFC 321 when she defeated Verna Jandiroba to become the new strawweight title. Coach, what's that, like 4 or 5 of them we were talking about the other day when we were lining you up for the show? Amazing run, amazing career you've had.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Santa Ana, huh? Fuck, that's
Yeah.
awesome. You gotta miss Santa Ana.
The mean streets of Santa Ana. Goes went to Saddleback High right off the 55
Oh
and Dyer.
wow.
I went to Mater Day off Bristol and Edinger. But so
Yeah.
we're familiar with that whole Costa Mesa area. Those were our
Stomping grounds.
yeah, exactly. South Coast Plaza, especially.
Oh yeah, I'm
Um,
I'm I'm 3 minutes from South Coast Plaza, so I'm
oh
real
yeah,
close.
yeah. So, coach, what's in the winning recipe? It's one thing to get the fighter better to their talents, but they gotta rise to the occasion on the title, the night of the title, right?
Of
Um,
course.
what have you noticed? I guess out of all your champions, Bisping, Cyborg, Penn, Dern, and getting to title fights, what's the key ingredient?
I mean, the key ingredient for them is obviously mental, man. I mean, obviously it's a hard work. It's the discipline, the dedication, all that cliche, stuff that people like to say. But I mean, obviously, it's on my part as far as helping them to get there is a tremendous amount of patience. Let's go with, because I mean, really, it's just I mean, it's what they're doing. It's really the dedication. I mean, I wish there was a magical answer, but it's really, people always ask, is champion born, is he made? And I always answer it's a little bit of both. There's a lot of talented fighters out there that got lost in translation that, had all the talent and all the ability and even maybe even the mindset to get there, but they don't they don't have the whether it's the discipline or the direction. I think it helps when you get together with like-minded people and uh and people that can understand the direction you're pointing them in and trying to help them to get to. And for me, it's been the right connections. I mean, could some of these guys maybe have won the world titles in other gyms and under other coaches? Well, maybe, and maybe not too. So, um, to me, all the success that I've had with my fighters is just having, time together, spending day in, day out in the gym, getting to know them, getting to know the way their mind works, and just, help really, help developing their skills. Developing skills, I think, is not that that's the easy part, but that's, how you put together and help your athlete put together their skill set is, happens with trainers. That's what you do. You're training them in the gym, but as far as coaching them and in helping them get to, obviously the top of the mountain where they want to be, to be a world champion, you gotta get to their soul and their brain a little bit. So, you know, I've had success with the fighters I've had success with. It's been based because we've had a really good relationship and they've really listened to me. They've taken my advice and they've taken how I try to help them with their mindset and really apply that when they go to the fights.
If I'm not mistaken, with Mackenzie Dern, your latest champ, she was with you, and then you guys may have parted ways, and then she came back. Can you, I guess, just fill that in? What made you guys click, and then maybe for a moment not, and then bring it back together?
Yeah, well, before I trained Mackenzie Dern, I kind of was on you know, it has nothing to do with, you know, I'm no male chauvinist. I'll say this at the end of the day, but maybe a little bit. But at the end of the day, I wasn't really, looking forward to going back to working with female fighters only because there's, you know, there's always somebody in somebody's life that tries to influence their career, and that's always a difficult part that coaches got to hurdles that coaches have to deal with. Whether it's a family member, whether it's a spouse, or whether it's friends or other coaches or whatnot. So there's always, especially the higher the level the athletes get, the more voices are going to be popping into their head and their ears and want to influence them some way somehow. But with girls, a lot of times they have a boyfriend or a husband or somebody that's also involved in the MMA game, and that's always given me nothing but headaches. I'm not getting rich over here training fighters. It's not the most lucrative business in the world. I do all right. I take care of my family, but at the end of the day, there's a lot more that goes on behind that when you have other people that want to affect your work as a coach. But when Mackenzie came to me, we hit it off right away. So I told her, I said, look, I'm making an exception. Obviously, you're a very talented jujitsu girl, and a lot of people feel like you have a lot of potential because of what your jujitsu background. But at the time, Mackenzie looked like she was fighting in a nightclub. You know what I mean? She's a wild girl, has all the guts in the world, but not an inch of fundamentals whatsoever. But we got together, we started gaining some success and really getting to know each other. And I, really had her listen to me and started to develop and climb up the ladder and getting towards we got into the top 10. And well, there we go. Is the exact same thing that I started this question with. I'm gonna fill it out here in the middle. She was involved with, a husband or a boyfriend that was in the game, and I think really, right from the get go, already had an overabundance amount of opinions about what she should be doing, how she should be doing, and what she should not take into account that she's been with a coach for the last 3-4 years prior to him coming to the surface, and now. And the guy, and I understand it. That's your girl, and you want to be in her ear and tell her what to do. And that for me, Mackenzie probably would rather not. Doesn't really want to, I don't know, put it in words of how we kind of split there for a second. But in my opinion, there's a lot of voice in her ear. We're coming off that, I think it was Angela Hill fight was the last fight that I had worked her corner for. And we, after that fight, we just kind of parted company, for a couple fights there. Cause I think everybody in her ear probably was telling her that she probably didn't need me, and that, you know, I'm sure she got a ton of advice about how, I don't play an important role maybe in her career and as far as coaching her, which I think is obviously I think they're misguiding her on that. But, she went out and she found out because, when she went out and she had her next fight, I knew too, because she wasn't clicked into the fundamental, like, she's come a far way. Like I
Oh
said,
yeah.
she looked like she was in a nightclub throw. Like I was like, wow, man, this is good. And then even when you start settling down and getting the fight, getting the head right and understanding what you're doing and having a little more sense of direction when you're in the gym. Now you got to go into the lights, under the bright lights, and you got to do it in front of a crowd, and you got to do it, real action, live time with somebody else thinking and somebody else trying to kick your ass. And now you got to be able to settle down and be able to perform like you're doing in the gym. Now I'm bringing it over into the cage, into the fight, into the night, under the lights. Um, and she was tiptoeing to that. She was getting feel, she stopped finally turning her back and bringing her head up in the air. Just there's a lot of fundamental flaws that she has had, and a lot of people have. It's not an easy thing just to come in and learn how to stand up and fight.
You've
You
definitely
know,
cleaned her up. Yeah, that's definitely
yeah.
been noticeable because she had some pretty good power tucked in there, and it was a little loopy and wild. But now that you've straightened out the punches, man, she's always been tough. She can take a punch. She's got that jujitsu ace up her sleeve. But once the fundamentals started getting cleaned up, I could tell, man, not only could she be a champion, but she could be a star. She's got the $1 million smile, and she's
She's a
put in
triple
the
threat.
time.
She's a
Yeah,
triple threat. She's got the looks. She can speak very well in a couple languages, to be fair. And she's a champion of the world.
yeah.
She's a blessing. But in those couple fights she went out, I saw some of her fundamentals going back to old school and getting wild and started getting crazy again. And and she reached out to me. She actually FaceTimed me from the locker room of the Lemos fight.
Mm.
And she goes, Coach, I got to get back with you, and, I said, of course, she came to me and said, hey, what can I do? Can I pay you more money? How can we, how can we? And I said, listen, everybody deserves a second chance. You know what I mean? Everybody, on the planet deserves a second chance. Let's see if we can get together and finish what we started, and fortunately, she had the wherewithal to come back. And, of course, I had that patience that I was, talking about at the beginning of this conversation here. And of course, I believed in Mackenzie the entire time, but at the same time, she's got to believe in the person that's helping her get there, and fortunately, we developed that relationship back. And since then, we've had a good little run and obviously winning the world title.
Go ahead, Goes. What do you have for the coach?
Coach, so I guess what I wanted to ask you was, with all the big accolades that you've had in your career, where does this one rank for you?
It ranks just as high as any of them. Winning a world title is the most special thing in these people's lives. It's special in my life too. I mean, it's something that, I used to be a fighter. I wish I had the time and the ability to get to that place in my life as well. Being a fighter is like, it's a lifestyle. It's your life. These people love it more than themselves. I mean, and people don't get there, and they don't get there. Some people, you don't realize how much they loved it and how important it was to them. And when they're not there now that they're, doing an everyday job and never getting those accolades that they sacrifice a lot of their life, a lot of their social life, a lot of their freedoms in life, or, a lot of, relationships they've sacrificed. I mean, everything, to try to get to this point. And then when you don't get there, you're lost in the bliss, so at the end of the day, it's important to me. It's everyone's just as important because I know how important it is to them, and I spend all these years with these people. I spend year. I mean, people talk about training, they're like, oh yeah, you got them ready for that, this fight, and they think of as if it's a 2 month period of time or a 3 month period of time. I spend years with these athletes. I've spent years with every champion that you named. I spend years with them, and going through highs and lows as well. So when any of them get there to that most important part and where their life completely changes because of it, because I see it time and time again. And I've told fighters that, like Mackenzie before this, I said, Mackenzie, this is going to change your life. You feel popular, you got millions of people following you, but it's not the same animal. Winning a world championship and being a UFC world champion is a whole different animal. It changes your life. If you're world champion, you know, in this field, not that you're set for life, but you have, you're in the history books, and it's just an honor and it's a blessing to be a part of those fights.
In this sport, there's a lot of trial and error, and you've been doing this for so long. Can you maybe point to maybe a technique or a moment where, when you apply it to today's game, it's just no longer relevant? It was almost like we all just kind of got it wrong for a little period of time.
Well, I mean, there's a tons of stuff, right? I mean, you would imagine like everything develops and gets better and stronger, and people start hitting the ball farther, people start kicking the ball farther, every fight, I body mechanics, I guess, develop, over, it's always going to get get to another level. But um, I was just thinking about something when you were asking me that question. What were you asking? You said, what do you think has changed significantly about techniques? Is that what you
Yeah,
said?
yeah, techniques or
Well,
even
well, it's funny
mindsets.
because and I'm going to say this, and I don't know if people think it's a cop out answer, or I just don't think that. I think that mostly I'm talking to deaf ears when I say this, and I think deaf ears come. The majority falls in the deaf ear category because it's hard to really understand at the end of the day. But how mental fighting is in all athletes, all sports, and anything you do. When you get to the highest echelon of anything, I mean, it's going to be the mental space. It's going to be where you're at, up in the brain. And because if you look at fundamentals and athletes, you saw some really talented athletes 20 years ago, more talented athletes than you have today. You look like a DDP, who's not a lot of people give him a lot of credit for coordination or athleticism, but that guy's in another mind frame. He's in another belief in himself. He's in another category of his own of his will, I should say, and I'm sure discipline as well. So, the very important fundamentals of fighting are still there. They're just as strongly there as they were 20 years ago. Now, as far as, the coordination and the body mechanics and how people are able to put things together, that has developed, you know, quite a bit. So as far as technically, I would say as far as how separated each martial art maybe has been, they definitely have blended together much more than they have a year ago. I'm sorry, 20 years ago. So 20 years ago, you'd say this guy's a boxer and this guy's a wrestler. Now that we got well-rounded fighters. We got guys that know how to blend their boxing with their kickboxing to their takedowns to their put it all together. And I think that's still developing as well. I still think that's got a lot of room to grow. Where let's say another 20 years, it's going to be a lot less, a lot more seamless. And it's just really developed as far as being a full-blown fighting sport as opposed to separate fighters fighting each other.
I
Hey, Ghost, can
gotcha.
I jump in real quick?
Sure.
I could think of three that you still see them, just not as often. That heel stomp, the kick to the thigh, it's become more the kick to the calf, and then the rubber guard. Nobody really does the rubber guard as much anymore to neutralize. Everyone's obviously trying to
Well,
get up. You
even the
might do it
guard.
for a second, but
Well, even the guard, to be fair, I mean, nobody wants to sit. I mean, there's a lot more action from the guard, I guess, back there. I mean, look at well, Mackenzie was in the guard, but she definitely was doing a lot of work from her back when she was in this last fight. But yeah, no, I hear you. The kick. I mean, the thigh. Hey, don't think the thigh kick doesn't still hurt. That's
hell
still
yeah.
effective if somebody's got the accuracy, the eye for it, the distance for it. But yeah,
Mhm.
people love the calf, and sure, there's a lot of this and that the foot stomp, of course. That's funny. The foot stomp. Who was Marco Huas? I think was a big foot stomper,
Marco
right?
Huas, yes.
Yeah, the king
Yeah,
of the streets.
the king of
Coach,
the streets, right?
I was
Against
wondering
Chris Paul Garland's.
if
Yep,
yeah,
Arlen.
if you could kind of help us break something down that we had just finished watching. The Valentina Shevchenko fight, Zhang Weili. Um, at the end of the day, how much of that had to do with just size? Because there were moments where you just felt like Zhang Weili was just maybe too small for this division. But at the same time, there were moments where you could point to a lot of the game plan and a lot of technique that Valentina was doing. How much of that, what percentage do you think was size? And do you anticipate Zhang Weili maybe coming back down after that?
I definitely anticipate her coming down just because she was shut out so cleanly. Um, and sure, size. I mean, size. Of course, that's why we have weight classes, right? What was that jump? That was a 10-pound jump. I mean, in that smaller division too, a 10-pound jump is pretty significant. Size comes into play. I mean, Valentina's control of distance, though, is, that's always been, she's always been a very high level fighter as far as, understanding that, she comes from that world and, she applies it, you know, geniusly to the MMA game. And she just controlled Weili. I think Wei probably maybe because of all the years and experience of all the fights that she's been in, maybe had her holding back a little bit. Is why I said, like, see, you don't realize people are like, God, she couldn't get to her, she's too small. And I'm like, and she's also got a lot of years under her now. And she's been in some shoot wars and some fights. I mean, the Joanna fight was, that was a bloodbath. And, was that this mentally, let's go back to that mentally. I think mentally, she had Wei Li really hesitating because every time she tried to close the gap, she was touched and taken care of. So, really, had her stuck in the mud. Sorry, were you trying to respond?
No.
Okay. But yeah, so size controlled that, but of course, the smaller guy, if he knows how to use it, could take advantage of the same situation. But as far as her commitment for second goes and trying to kind of follow up and kind of get a little bit, be willing to get reckless, Willie's so fundamentally sound, and so sometimes you look so good with the way you throw, you're worried about looking bad, so you don't take chances as well. Not that I think the champ was shutting down a lot of her, what she was trying to do. But regardless, size obviously comes into play. And I just think experience too, a lot of experience. I know the champ didn't have her best showings too, probably the last couple fights, but I know she won the last one. I think she lost the one before that. Is that what happened? To
Should beat
Grasso?
Manon Fior.
Okay. Yeah, my biggest issue in this world is I don't pay attention. I pay attention to whoever my guy or girl is fighting, and kind of stay in that category, in that division. The 125-pound women division, I haven't really followed a lot, but yeah, I mean, she did a tremendous job of just controlling that range and just picking her off every time she came in, and then intelligently taking her down, making it easy, holding her down. I mean, it wasn't the most exciting fight to watch. It would have been nice to see, you know, we all want to see a bloodbath, when you see a real technically sound fight to where somebody controls the other person, kind of like the title fight where the other guy did the same thing. I mean, it's not the funnest thing to watch, but, well executed.
Now, who do you think Mackenzie should defend against? Do you think
Her,
Zhang Weili cuts the line? Is that do you want the biggest
yes.
fight, or do you want the ones that make the most sense and is fair to the rest of the division? Maybe, I don't know.
Well, I mean, whatever's fair. Sure, I don't know what's fair. You know what I mean? Well, how do I know? I felt like things have been unfair on the sides of my fighters, and I felt like it, life isn't fair, is it? At the end of the day, it's a doggy dog world, and she's got to be ready for anybody. I would love to see her fight Whaley. I want her to fight Whaley. Matter of fact, after she beat Rebus, I'm like, I would like to see us get one more fight, before we fight for the title, so we can get back, because it would have been our, third fight back after, our little break up there. But and I still wanted her to be settled down a little bit more. And you know what? We got that fight. It was for the title, and she won it. Now I got to believe in my heart of hearts, and she's got to believe in her heart of hearts. Most importantly, she got to stay, in the gym. That's my biggest issue with Mackenzie Dern. But if I keep her in the gym, she got to be ready for anybody. And I do think I would love to have the fight with Weili. I think that's all. Talk about fair or unfair. I think that's fair. I think that's fair to the whole division, to be fair. If she decides to come back down. You're going up there, I'm sure she put on some muscle mass. I'm sure she went up in weight, so she's going to have to, take some time to come back down a little bit. But, she's not the biggest girl in the world. I'm sure it's not going to be a big issue for her. But, anybody really, she's a champion now. You got to be ready for anybody. And you got to be willing to fight anybody. And, we got to do our best to be ready for it.
I know that you don't necessarily have like an 8 TT type gym where there's hundreds. Yours has always been more of a private gym. Do you have any up and comers, or some future champs that you can share with us?
Well, I got a
Anyone in the
couple
pipeline?
kids. Yeah, I got a couple kids. I got a kid that just broke into the UFC. His name's Santiago Luna. He's a 21-year-old kid, border boy. He's he's a stud. He's just young. He's young, and he's got a lot of room to grow, and he's got to he's got to get the experience. And fortunately, he's got plenty of time. You know, and he's a tremendous talent, and I expect great things out of that kid. And then I got another kid. I got two other kids. I got another kid that Nick Maximoff, who I spend a lot of time with him. He's he was in the UFC. He was 3-2 in the UFC, beat some really good guys that still continue to fight in the UFC today. Um, he's 5-0 since he's left the UFC. He's developing. He just knocked a couple guys out in the gym last week, because I've been really focusing time on developing his stand-up game. I mean, he's a stud on the ground. He can wrestle with anybody at 85. He can wrestle with out there. you know, and he's getting to the point where I know he can quote unquote bang with any of these guys too. He's a good fighter. He just we've been taking our time and really developing. He's at 27 right now. I'm just hoping he gets a call at some point for the UFC because for some reason we can't click back in there. But I told him even yesterday, I said it's probably a blessing in disguise because, you know, he's a smart kid and, you know, and he's getting more and more mature mentally. He's getting a lot more experience, just just really coming into his own as far as being a well-rounded fighter. You know, being able to, like we were talking about earlier in this conversation, putting it together, putting his wrestling together, getting confidence in his punching, getting confidence in the kicking, getting confidence in his movement, and the kid's a real stud. I actually expect a lot out of that kid. I really know he has all the potential in the world. You know, it's just hopefully he gets the opportunity. You know, he's gonna be fighting, I think, A1 in January, I believe, but he's just waiting by the phone, hopefully. And I don't know what's keeping him out of there, to be fair. I don't know because, you know, you see a lot of, you know, lower level fighters and some higher level fighters get, you know, opportunities to get there. And, you know, I don't know what it is, but hopefully he just keeps doing, I told him, you just keep doing what you're doing. You just keep kicking ass. And, you know, sooner or later, you know, hopefully we'll get that opportunity.
Yep. And Border Boy, yeah, Luna's legit. So you got yourself a good pupil there. But thanks for holding it down in the OC. You know, in '93, obviously Torrance was like a mecca of MMA with Hoist Gracie, and then it kind of slid down to Huntington Beach, you know, with Team Punishment. So over the years, SoCal's always had a representation, and for like the last 20, you've been holding it down as well with the Ruka Gym. So congrats on all your success. Congrats on the recent success with Dern. That was amazing to see her, you know, win that title. Obviously being an ADCC champ and then honing her skills and staying positive. She had those weight issues early on. That's like 7 years ago. And then she buttoned that down. She had a kid, then she came right back. She's had a few losses, but man, she put it together. That I love those types of runs. So congrats again. That was really cool to watch. And congrats
I
on
love it too. Especially when you got high hopes for yourself. Like when people got high hopes for you, it's nice to learn the game a little bit through the middle of it rather than finding out, you know, if you tiptoe around there and you don't earn it, because she's earned it, you know, whether people want to, think it's fair or not, she's earned it where she's at right now. I think it gives us a better shot at holding on that title with the experience that she got leading up to the point of the title. You know what I mean? So I plan on her holding it for a few more here.
All right. Well, like you said, just got to get in the gym. Has she been in the gym since the win?
She hasn't. She's fucking killing me. I talked to her. She got to the airport early yesterday, and I was on the phone with her for 3 hours. She was sitting there talking. She got a poker tournament. She got a trip to Brazil. I'm going, please, go for a jog. We need to keep you. She said she's going to get in the gym one day in this coming up week. You know, I got to really be on her about it. Unfortunately, now that she's a champ, I'm going to really even be more on her. I mean, again, go back to patience. I'm really patient with my fighters. I let them kind of make their decisions, and that way I know whether they're about making the right decision or not. But hopefully we get in the gym. I think you guys should call her or at least make sure you make a comment on what her say. Hey, make sure you get. The coach says make sure you get to the gym. All right, we got to keep that in her ear.
We will. She's humble.
Right,
she told us at the UFC Fight Expo that she's still, you know, like you said, she needed a little bit more seasoning. But then the champ went up, and the opportunity was there, and she seized it. So congrats to her.
Yeah, God bless, fellas. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the time, Coach. We'll talk to you soon.
Cheers.